Thank you to the Workbench team, and thank you very much to the New York Enterprise Tech Meetup for inviting Tahi and I to come spend some time with you this evening. Tahi and I are dyed-in-the-wool enterprise tech folks, and we thought we'd share some lessons learned over the last 15 years. Tahi and I have been working together for 15 years. Tahi is an investor, and me as an enterprise entrepreneur. Built 2 companies together, so we thought we'd share a little bit about our backgrounds, just to provide some context. So Bob Tinker, 3-time entrepreneur. The first company went from 0 to not much. The second company went from 0 to about $80 million a year in about 4 years and became the Cisco wireless business unit in 2005. The third company is a mobile security company called Mobile Iron, where I was the founding CEO. Took it from 3 people to nearly 160 million a year in public on NASDAQ. So had 3 very different enterprise startup experiences. Tahi and I worked together on the last 2. Tahi is the managing director of Storm Ventures, which is an enterprise-focused venture capital firm based in Silicon Valley. You could see some of the investments that Tahi's made in companies like Marketo, Mobile Iron, Airspace, Engagio, ProsperWorks, and a very successful track record. And as you sort of get a sense for the 2 of us tonight, you'll sort of get a little bit of a different flavor from each of us about the journey, even though both of us were on the same journey together. Sometimes we'd look at each other and be like, did we actually watch the same movie? So Tahi is sort of the model guy. As a lot of investors and venture capitalists sort of sees the patterns, looks for the commonalities, what can you learn from that, what can you apply to that? I'm more the entrepreneur, which is like, look, dude, I got 1 surfboard, and if this one doesn't work, I'm dead. So I'm more like the punchline guy, which is, let's distill it down. What does it actually mean for the entrepreneur so we actually know what to do with it? And you'll sort of get this flavor as we're talking tonight. So with that, let me hand off to Tahi for the next part.
And as Bob mentioned, because of our different personalities, at the beginning I felt like we were writing dueling chapters. And a good friend of mine was in the meeting. He actually thought we would split the book into like 2 views for every chapter. But I think through the process, we were able to synthesize our views, and it came out with something that overall was better. A question that many people ask us is, why do we write the book? Sometimes I think we ask this question ourselves, since it's been like a 2.5-year project. And it's because so many people have helped us in our journey that we want to sort of pay back and sort of help people in the same extent that they've helped us. And it really came down to this question as like, what did we wish we had known 15 years ago when we were starting Airspace together? And we came up with sort of 2 key observations as through this process. The first one is, why do so many enterprise companies get to product market fit but never unlock growth? In other words, why do so many startups get to like 5 customers, 10 customers, maybe 20, but just has a hard time breaking out and becoming a successful company? The second is that why is growing a startup so hard on the people? I mean, and we're talking about here not just the hard work or the hours, but that it just puts a huge emotional strain on people as they need to go through the journey. And so we came up with, as Bob mentions, the punchline guy, and you can tell Bob made the slide deck. And so it's 2 key punchlines, is that product market fit is great, but not enough to unlock growth. That what you really need is this new term that we felt was lacking, and that is you need to find go-to-market fit. In other words, the time that you have basically repeatable, scalable, predictable growth. And that's exactly what investors are looking for. The second thing is that growth changes everything, especially the people, the chemistry, and even the founders. And for the company to succeed, not only do you need to find go-to-market fit, but the people need to also advance the company to future levels. And there we find that unlearning is the key. And then with that, turn it over here to Bob.
So we decided to write it down, and it turned into a book. And what we would love for sort of this to become, and why we wrote it basically for enterprise entrepreneurs, is really the question is, you're all asking right now is, hey, how do I succeed right now? Like, how do you help me tackle the things that are in front of me right now and turn on my radar for what's next? Like, that's really sort of the core job of an enterprise entrepreneur at this stage, is help me right now and help me figure out what's next. And we wrote it down, turned into a book. It's survivaltothrival.com. It's available, orderable on Amazon as of about last week, and it'll ship in about 2 weeks. So the funny thing when we started working on this project is then other people started to pitch in, which was really fun. So, we have anecdotes and stories in the book from Aaron Levy at Box, Mark Templeton at Citrix, Samir Dokula from SendGrid, Mark Leslie, who's the founder of Veritas, John Miller, who's in Gageo. And these are all sort of real-world stories, real-world anecdotes about things they wrestled with and solved. But this is not a hero's journey. One of the things that was sort of really important for us is we were undergoing this and spending time saying, what do we wish we had known 15 years ago? Is don't just tell me the stuff that went right. Talk to me about the things that went wrong, what worked, what didn't work. What did you see other people do that you wish you had done, and the stuff that sometimes just sucks. That's sort of the real stuff. And in going through that journey, we had a big aha, which is that fundamentally, I think there's a bug in the enterprise entrepreneurship community, which is that we're fundamentally a product shop. We're really good at helping entrepreneurs build products, but I would argue we're relatively bad at helping entrepreneurs build go-to-markets and sales on the back of those products. And I think that's actually a problem for us as sort of an ecosystem. And when we started drilling into that, like, how do we actually help crack this nut? We asked that question that Tehi said, which is, why do so many companies get to product market fit but never really unlock growth? And what we found is that achieving product market fit for where all the startups are right now, for you Workbench folks, is a huge milestone. Like, it's super, super important. You got to get there. How do you win your first 5, 10, 20 customers? But here's the catch, which is that's not sufficient to unlock growth. There's actually a missing link between product market fit and growth for an enterprise company that is not there for a consumer company. And the weird thing is this missing link doesn't even have a name, which is sort of emblematic that it's actually even more of a system problem, the fact that it doesn't have a name, it doesn't have identity, it doesn't have a structure for people to talk about it. So we decided to try and name it. So we hope it catches on. We'll see. We believe the missing link is something we call go-to-market fit, which comes after product market fit. And I want to talk about this because if you look at the journey I had at Mobile Iron, we went from in the early days winning like 5 customers a quarter, 10 customers a quarter, to 50, 100, 150, 500 customers a quarter. And if you sort of rewind, like, what did we do to unlock that kind of growth? And when I talked to Aaron at Box or Samir at SendGrid, say, how did you guys actually go from sort of winning your first 20 to knocking down 100 or 200 customers a quarter? There was a remarkable pattern of commonality between all of our journeys, which is these 3 things. So go-to-market fit has 3 core components to it. The first one is relatively simple, which is you need to pick a sales model. I know that sounds obvious, but an early-stage startup can only handle one sales model at a time. Doesn't matter what it is. There's no right or wrong answer here. It can be direct, can be indirect, can be channel, can be freemium, can be web, it can be free. Doesn't matter, but you got to pick one. And the trick is sort of how do you know which one to pick? Because the company actually ends up getting wired very differently depending on which one you pick. So there's a really good blog post by Mark Leslie, who is one of the lecturers at the Stanford Business School, was the founder of Veritas, called Leslie's Compass, which sort of walks through sort of the different ways to pick go-to-markets. I'd recommend reading it. But you can sort of distill it down to this little spectrum of right to left, which is on the far left, you have sort of a high sales-led model where marketing basically generates leads and hands them off to sales. Sales does everything. You have sort of a marketing-led model where it's like marketing does a bunch of the front-end work, and then eventually there's enough activity in the account where sales picks it up. And then there's the zero-touch model, like a Twilio or a SendGrid, where it's completely self-serve. So it's a spectrum. There's no right or wrong answer. And actually, if you look at some of the companies we've been involved with, Mobile Iron was a sales-led playbook. Marketo was 50-50. They were more marketing-led. Duh, they're a marketing company. But look at something like SendGrid or Twilio. They were self-serve. Now, don't get caught up in the fads about what's a popular sales model right now. Investors love low-touch self-serve models right now because you don't spend any money on sales. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the right sales model for you and your product. So there's an interesting pattern underneath all three of these for how the decision gets made. So if you actually pull it apart, what you really need to look at is how does the customer decide to buy your product? It really comes down to that one question. If the buyer and decider are the same person, you can reach them on digital marketing, you can do self-serve. If it's a committee decision by 8 people inside an enterprise, you need to do heavy touch sales. Right? It really sort of distills down to that one question, which is how does the customer decide to buy your product? So now that you've picked your sales model, here's where the real magic happens. And this was sort of a huge aha for me in watching this happen at Mobile Iron, which is how do you build a go-to-market playbook? Which is finding and winning. Yeah, do you mind holding questions to the end, actually? Because we're going to make sure we got enough time for questions for everybody. Thank you. How do you find and win customers in a repeatable way? And, I'll tell I made a mistake here. I thought originally it's like, well, that just means you need a good PowerPoint pitch deck and some good sales tactics. How many people sort of thought that was the answer? That's not the answer. I thought that's what that was. Boy, was I wrong. Enormously wrong. Really what happens when you get the go-to-market playbook right for how do you find and win customers in a repeatable way, it becomes like the operating system for your go-to-market. It becomes like the musculature of your company. And it is crazy powerful when you get it right. So the question is, how do you then go do this? The good news is there's actually sort of a method to the madness. And I'll walk you through sort of the 3 core steps. The first one is sort of lay out your customer journey across the top. Are you marketing-led, sales-led, or self-service? Just figure out what the steps of your customer journey are. But here's the big mistake some companies do, is they mistake that for the forecasting stages in Salesforce. Don't do that. This is not the forecasting 70%, 40% stages in Salesforce that comes with Salesforce. You got to look at what is the physics, actually, of your customer journey. You'd be surprised if you sit down as a leadership team and say, what is the physics of our customer journey? You'll be surprised how you guys are all 70% on the same page at your company and like 30% not, and you got to fix that 30% not. Getting this part right, just this simple part right, is very powerful. Well, then the second part of this for building your go-to-market playbook is what do your sales and marketing teams say or do at each stage of the playbook? What do they say or do? And in each one of these, how do you find the wow? So the wow is sort of a dumb term for something that's actually really important, which is, you guys know when you're in like your first meetings with customers and you're talking about what you do, and you suddenly see their like body language change, and they kind of lean in, they're like, tell me more. That was a wow moment right there, where you got their attention, they wanted to learn more, they wanted to dig in. Figure out what your wow moments are. And this is actually harder than it sounds, to distill down what are the core things to be able to do and say and finding your wow moments. And one of the classic mistakes is that often the product leaders think they know what the wows are because it was obviously the thing you worked the hardest on to build that you're most proud of. The trick is you don't get to decide the wow, the customer does. So pay close attention to the body language during building the go-to-market playbook for what the customers do and how they behave as part of your sales engagement process. The other thing is sort of distilling down to this core, what do people say and do at each stage. I was working with a company in Seattle. They proudly showed me their go-to-market playbook. that they built the first 50% in 4 hours. Good job. It took them 4 weeks of 3 hours, 3 times a week as a leadership team together to get the other 50% done. Why? Because it forced taking all this implicit things going on that everybody had sort of a slightly different version of the reality and forced it to get explicit. And it was a really painful exercise, but very powerful. So then, what's the third part of doing the playbook? Is that under each stage, what does the rest of the company do to support that? And we kind of did this by accident because you sort of have you got a first meeting pitch, you got a demo guide, you got some SEO, SEM call scripts, you got all sorts of stuff that different people are doing. What I didn't realize, we sort of did this just to like project manage like all our stuff we were doing. What was fascinating is the psychological impact this had on the company. All of a sudden, everybody in the company understood how all the different things they were working on tied to the go-to-market playbook. This cacophony of stuff that everybody was being asked to do all of a sudden made sense. The engineers who were being asked, why do we need to build a demo to look this way? It's because it ties to this part of the go-to-market playbook. The marketing team is building this. It's because it ties to the go-to-market playbook. It was a remarkably unifying force for us. And I only realized that in the rearview mirror because it really becomes the OS for your company. And then kind of a nice side effect to this is if you get your go-to-market playbook right, metrics come for free because you just watch customers and prospects sort of move through your customer journey. So get this right, and I promise you it will be one of the most powerful forces in you finding go-to-market fit. But the bad news is that the playbook isn't enough. You can have a sales model. You can have a really kick-ass, repeatable playbook to find and win customers. But there's another thing you need to unlock growth, which is urgency. And it's very simple. It has to answer the question, why is the customer going to buy now and not 6 months from now? And if you don't have an answer to that question, growth does not unlock. So you need those 3 core things to find go-to-market fit. One is clear sales model. Just pick it. There's no right or wrong answer. Do the hard work to build your repeatable marketing and sales playbook. And then 3, make sure you're lining up on a problem with urgency that answers the question, why now, and not 6 months from now. And I get asked the question, like, what does go-to-market fit feel like when you find it? The answer is you'll know because you start to feel the momentum. You start to feel the repeatability. You hire a new salesperson, and you say, do this. You add a channel, you give them this, and they go, wow, I know how to win deals. Like, you feel the momentum start to build. And it is some of the most fun you will ever have in building an enterprise startup. Like, when I think back to those days at Mobile Iron, when we hit that knee in the curve, and all of a sudden we went from winning 20 customers a quarter to 50 to 100 to 150, I get chills just thinking about it. And our goal with introducing this go-to-market fit concept is to provide a structure for entrepreneurs to be able to do the same. And once you find go-to-market fit, everything changes for your company. That is the point where you switch from survival mode, which is everybody knows the first job of an early stage startup is don't die. How many of you are in the don't die stage right now? Okay, how many of you are in the like, hey, we figured it out, we're trying to figure out how to win stage? All right, awesome. So, oh yeah, there's a huge difference. There's a huge difference, trust me. So in the beginning, you're like, all right, how do we not die? Once you go to market fit and start to feel momentum, it all of a sudden becomes, how do we win? How do we beat the competition? And when that happens, everything changes in your company. Everything changes. I was awestruck, if I look back through the rearview mirror, about how much everything from my job, all the leaders' jobs, how we ran the business, what the culture was like, everything changed. And it was hard. But every company will remember their Thrival moment where it shifted from, oh crap, how do we not die, to, wow, how do we win? So I was talking to Teen Zoe from Zuora, who does basically SaaS billing software. They, for a long time, were evangelizing the subscription economy. They spent a ton of time evangelizing. They had an offsite at Cavallo Point in San Francisco across the bay, and the director of sales engineering, a guy named Matt, put up this slide with a bunch of logos on it. And at the end, everybody's like, okay, those are customers we're talking to. Matt was like, no, these actually customers are going to decide either us or somebody else. And everyone's like, wait a minute. You mean it's not evangelical mode? We're actually in they'll buy us or somebody else? Oh, crap. Like, the game has now changed. It's now shifted from how do we convince people to care to crap, how do we win? For Aaron Levy at Box, they were at about $3 to $4 million a year. And they were following sort of the classic sort of bowling pin thing, go like find a vertical market, win the first bowling pin, then knock the other ones down. But they were a little bit confused because they actually had big customers in professional services. They had big customers in healthcare. They had big customers in pharma. They had big customers in financial services. So it didn't feel like there was a bowling pin, like a single bowling pin they met. But when they actually pulled apart the customers, they realized that every single customer was using them for the same problem. So their reaction was like, I think his exact quote was, holy crap, every vertical has the exact same problem. So they had actually found a horizontal that was repeatable across all these different markets, and that's when they took off. For me at Mobile Iron, I remember the moment vividly. John Donnelly, who was our SVP of Worldwide Sales, we've been sort of ham and egging it when in 10 customers, 15 customers, 20 customers, it started to go. And we started to feel the repeatability and momentum. And John came in and said, hey, Bob, I am willing to double my quota if you let me hire salespeople to go after the deals. I can't get to all the deals in the pipeline right now. I was like, wow, that's like music to every CEO's ears. I'm willing to take up my quota by 2x if you let me hire people because I can't get to all the deals in front of me. Like, awesome. That was our Thrival moment. And when I look back and say, what changed? There's lots of things operationally, culturally, process-wise, execution-wise that changed when you hit your Thrival moment. But actually the biggest thing was in terms of the impact on the people. And I was surprised at how hard it was. And what I realized only looking through the rearview mirror is that as the company changes, everybody's jobs change, even though their title doesn't change. And it kind of sneaks up on you. So everybody's roles change. So as a result, what happens is then the people need to change themselves to adapt to those roles. Or you need to change the people, is the unfortunate reality. That transition for people adapting to the new jobs under duress of building a startup is painfully hard. Because what actually I learned in the rearview mirror is what got us from A to B, the very things that we as a company, we as a leadership team, me as the CEO said, here's why I'm proud, here's how we got where we are, that sort of became muscle memory. Those things actually became the way, things that could hold us back or kill us at the next stage. And it's kind of a nutty feeling to have to be rewiring yourself under duress, and it's really hard. It kind of feels like this, which is you're piloting an airplane, trying to desperately gain altitude, pulling up on the stick, your adrenaline's through the roof, and you rip open the fuselage to mess around with the wiring. This is like the last thing you want to do. You're just trying to gain altitude. But unfortunately, it's exactly what you do need to do and you must do. So I'm going to do some comic book analogies here. So for those of you that are familiar with the Marvel comic series and the movies, I'm going to go with the Avengers and the X-Men here. So the transition, the first transition that I went through, I actually had 3 really different CEO jobs at Mobile Iron over 8 years. 3 profoundly different CEO jobs. The first job was kind of like Captain America. It's like you and the platoon in the woods, where you're digging ditches, getting dirt, getting punched, bouncing into trees, taking punches. It's you and the platoon in the woods. But then, as things started to go, it becomes more like the Avengers, where you have to hire your band of superheroes. You know, a sales superhero, a marketing superhero, a product superhero, an engineering superhero, a support superhero. And you need to hire your band of superheroes, which all has a better superpower than you, the founders. And so many of you are sort of at this stage right now. And if I look back at that stage, sort of the three toughest challenges for me in making that transition from Captain America to the Avengers was, number one, like hiring superheroes was kind of uncomfortable for the existing team. If you're hiring a superhero who's really good, they're going to come in and start asking a bunch of really awkward questions. That's awesome. But it doesn't feel that great at the moment. The second thing is, as CEO, if you're going to hire the band of Avengers, you have to relinquish control. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to hire A players, and they're not going to succeed. But there's sort of a duality here, which is how do you relinquish control, yet maintain just enough control? It's a tough balance. And the third one was early stage startups sort of pride themselves on being a bit organic about execution, sort of informal, maybe no meetings. That stops because you have to go from being organic to organized and start putting together an execution cadence for you, the Avengers, and the rest of the superheroes. But then there was a third CEO job I had when it got to about 400, 500 people. And this was the one I actually struggled with the most, which is you go from sort of Captain America to the Avengers to more like Professor Xavier in the X-Men, where you're like the dean of a university. Your professors are your warriors that are bringing up the next generation. And you have to do a lot less things, but for a lot more people, and repeat yourself a lot. Drove me crazy. I was like, I literally felt like the emperor had no clothes. I'm like, if I'm repeating myself this much, everybody must notice it and think I'm dumb. And what I realized is that I had a bunch of built-in biases and a bunch of ways that I had sort of conceptualized how I add value to the company as the CEO that are very personal. Like it's how, like, why you feel justified, like breathing the air with the rest of the team. Well, guess what? You have to start letting go of some of those things, and it creates this weird, like, insecurity where you have to kind of reconceptualize what your job is. And in some cases, repeat yourself a lot. It's a tough transition, but a spectacular personal learning experience and personal growth experience. And for those of you that are the CEOs of your companies and the other executives, you know, the things that people talk about with CEO jobs is like the skills of the CEO. You know, do you have good vision? Are you a good communicator? Are you a good executor? All that stuff. I mean, that's all good stuff. Don't get me wrong. It's really important. But the stuff that doesn't get as much airtime is sort of the what's going on inside. Like what's going on with the soul of the CEO. What makes the CEO able to adapt from Captain America to the Avengers to Professor Xavier? And there's sort of three things that Tahi and I have discovered sort of over the 15 years working together, sort of the common patterns. The first one is self-awareness, which is the ability to look in the mirror and say, am I doing a good job or bad job, and what do I do about that? Because fundamentally, for an organization or a person, unless you look in the mirror, you actually can't learn and get any better. And as a company gets bigger as CEO, people will stop giving you truly honest feedback. So you have to kind of be outside yourself constantly, like watching, to be like, did I do a good job at that? Did I not do a good job at that? You have to be willing to make yourself vulnerable and admit mistakes. But it's all about creating this feedback loop to be adaptive and to learn. The second core CEO soul item is schizophrenia. That seems a little counterintuitive. Why is a mental disorder an important skill or important capability of a CEO? And it's because this. On one hand, you need to be kind of like this Moses character, like fearlessly leading people up the mountain to the promised land. And on the other hand, like looking over your shoulder, completely paranoid about all the things that could go wrong. And you have to hold those both states of mind simultaneously and not lose credibility. That's why schizophrenia is an important part of the CEO job. And the third one and last one is passion for the mission. Passion becomes like the nuclear reactor inside the CEO that fuels the CEO, and the rest of the team feed off it. It's like sort of this, the nice thing about nuclear reactions, they cascade and they chain. Like passion is that same kind of chemistry, but for the team. And, I'll share sort of for me what was sort of my biggest challenge as I learned how to be a CEO over an 8-year period. That my biggest challenge, you sort of look at the things that you sort of go back in the review mirror and say, here are the things I screwed up. You sort of peel the onion on them. They all sort of come back, most of them, not all, most of them come back to sort of one sort of pattern, which was I would sometimes let my fear of self-inflicted turbulence in the company get in the way of doing the right long-term thing. I would let my fear get in the way. And the reason that was there is in the early days, like self-inflicted turbulence at the wrong time can actually kill the company. Like it really can. So you desperately want to avoid it. But later, when the company's like 20, 30, $40 million a year, a couple hundred people, like sometimes you do need to deliberately self-inflict like a minor gunshot wound to inflict some turbulence, to make a change that's going to be painful, and it's going to suck for 60 or 90 days or 120 days. But you know what? The company's going to come out the backside stronger. And I let my fear of sort of that self-inflicted turbulence get in the way of doing the right long-term thing sometimes. And once I realized that, it was very empowering. It sort of unlocked a whole bunch of things. I made a bunch of changes. But I sort of had to build this like circuit breaker into my mind that if I sort of sense myself resisting a change, I'd be like, oh, wait. That's that pattern again. And that was probably the biggest breakthrough for me in terms of being able to get to the Professor Xavier job, was making that transition. And these transitions don't just apply to the CEO, they apply to every executive. So VP of sales, how many of you already have your head of sales in place? Nobody? Okay, couple, all right. So one of the mistakes companies make is, hey, we need to go start selling, go hire a VP of sales. Wrong answer. Why? No grade A VP of sales is going to be the first salesperson in the door, and you don't yet know the path through the woods. So the better thing to do is actually hire more of like a Davy Crockett character. Davy Crockett, for those of you who don't know, was an explorer in the late 1700s, early 1800s, sort of explored the middle west of the U.S. So hire Davy Crockett, who helps you find the path through the woods for your first 10 or 15 customers to find the patterns. Then you go hire Braveheart, who rallies the troops, runs down the path, knocks down the fort, and kills the British. Sorry for those of you that are English here. But then that job changes again, where it's no longer a battlefield general, battlefield commander like Braveheart, but more like Eisenhower, where you're a general of generals and you're in the war room, not out in the field. A lot of sales executives have a really tough challenge with that second transition. Going from a battlefield commander to the war room is a really hard transition. And the pattern here happens over and over and over and over again. And this goes back to one of the core themes, which is unlearning. That every single leader, the CEO, every single executive, and most of the senior folks in your teams, as you hit these change points in the companies, you fundamentally have to unlearn the things that actually made you successful in going from A to B and relearn the new job under duress. So I'll quote one of my favorite leadership consultants, a short green Muppet named Yoda, which is, you must unlearn what you have learned. And it's painful at the time, but I can promise you it is a spectacular personal growth and professional growth experience. And going through that type of thing, like many things in life, like having kids, getting married, so the big things you do in life sort of changes you on the inside, and I would argue for the better. I'll end on sort of a final topic on the mission. Remember I talked about sort of the mission is sort of this nuclear reactor that fuels the CEO. It's not just the CEO, it's all the founders and all the early team are driven by the mission. What is it that you want to accomplish? What is it that you want to change in the world? What is the difference you want to make? And along with that, it's really, really important to separate the mission from your ego. And I found this, like in the early days, you're pouring your heart and soul into the company. Your ego gets intertwined with the business and the company. You almost can't help it. Please, please, please work really hard to try and separate those two as much as you can. And this has sort of led to something I call the founder oath, which is it's about the mission, not me or my ego. And I promise to do my best to separate my ego from the business. We, the founders, work for the company and the team, not the other way around. And I recognize that very few things can screw up a great startup like founder drama. Founder drama is the saddest reason and most frequent reason that good startups get killed. So if for whatever reason, if the company is so fortunate to be able to grow beyond me, I will gracefully step aside for the good of the mission. And these aren't just hollow words. Every single founder at Mobile Iron did this over the 8-year period. AJ stepped aside from heading product. Suresh stepped aside from heading engineering. And I stepped aside in 2016 from being the CEO when we got to about $160 million. So these are not hollow words. But it's really a profound responsibility of the early team to separate your mission from the ego, because it is not about you, it's actually about the mission. So this leaves me with sort of one of my core leadership observations, which is passion for the mission is core, and ego, in my mind, is the ultimate enemy of leadership and actually the source of most politics and distraction. So with that, let me hand off to Tehi.
So we wanted to leave today, because we know it's late and appreciate everyone coming in, with something tangible. As you can tell from Bob, something very actionable is very important to him. And so we wanted to summarize all this with basically 3 points that we believe especially for early stage companies, is critical for their success. The first one is, find go-to-market fit. If you can do that and you can demonstrate, I can tell you as an investor, that's something you will get a lot of attention from investors. The second is that this whole idea of unlearn, as Bob mentioned, is so critical to building success in the company. And as part of that is leveraging that to integrate your first superheroes into the company beyond just the initial founding team, so that you can actually execute on this plan on go-to-market fit and others. And then lastly, as what Bob pointed out, is building this culture of the company where people value the mission higher than their own personal ego, so that you have a truly functional team. So we thought that, as you leave today, if you want to remember just 3 things, those are 3 points that we thought would be very actionable for companies at the early stage. And then the other is that we hope through this discussion that, some of the stories that Bob mentioned, some of the things we talked about are things that, you may be experiencing yourself. And we feel that that's important because at the end of the day, as every founder of a company, you feel like you're out there by yourself. Your spouses may not want to hear more about what's going on, all this. And so this is to just know that your experiences, the kind of problems you're facing, that you're not alone, that, everyone is facing it. And that's part of what we want to share through the book. Because many times the right answer isn't that there's a great answer here or there, but just knowing that, you're doing what everyone else had to do, which is like find product market fit, having to find go-to-market fit. Those are things that you just have to do to build a successful company. And so we want to end with is that, as mentioned, the title of the book is Survive Well, Thrive Well, and Good Luck. And then with that, we hope that we really thank you for being part and listening to us. And hopefully you can join the Survival Thrival community that we're building. And then lastly, if you like what we talked about, also buy the book on Amazon. Thank you very much. Yes.
You get to start.
Yes.
So I'll buy the book. That was great. When it comes to the first step, which was choose a sales model, it's a little bit the sales model chooses you based on the product
The question was, does in the beginning when you're sort of picking your sales model, do you pick your sales model, or does because of your product that picks the sales model for you? Is that the question?
Yeah, and then there's the back and forth play.
Back and forth play. So it is true that actually based on the product you're building and who you're selling to, that there are going to be like guardrails to where on that spectrum you can land. You can't sort of be like, well, I think I'll be self-service. No, I think we're going to be heavyweight, right? They're going to be guardrails. But there are different ways to build your product and different problems to solve that may sort of, you can have some choice over, which would steer you towards a heavyweight sales model, a midweight sales model, or a lightweight sales model. And so it's not a hardwired thing. Like a good example is like if you're selling to somebody in DevOps or, that often can be something that you could do with a light touch sales model or you could do with a trial-led sales model. But if you're actually going to sell a security product where the CIO and like 5 other people got to buy, guess where you are. So in those cases, it chooses you, but within the guardrails, you actually have a decent amount of choice about where on that spectrum you land. Other questions? Yeah. How much outside coaching did I get? A decent amount, actually. So I had 2 executive coaches over my time at Mobile Iron. And the first one was good. Like, did some 360 reviews, did some weekly calls, things like that. That was helpful. The second coach I had was transformative for me. And my takeaway for you on like navigating through some of these big transitions and driving the self-awareness and getting the feedback loop to really rewire yourself, you kind of can't do it yourself. It's hard. Ask your team, though. Your team, particularly if you've been in the trenches with them a while, will beat the crap out of you on the stuff that you're getting in the way on. So listen to them. Like, they really will tell you if you ask and they know you're really asking from the right place. But the second thing is getting an external coach can really help. And here's the measure. If your executive coach is not making you feel deeply uncomfortable, it's not working. It was a painfully uncomfortable experience. But that's kind of the point. Yeah, next question.
If you go through the process of trying to build this go-to-market fit strategy,
Yep.
and you actually come to the conclusion that, you know what, this isn't going to work, is there a way to fix that? Or do you take that moment to say, you know, maybe this is a good time for us to say this is where we got it?
So the question was, if you're, after you found product market fit, you're working on go-to-market fit, you iterate a couple times, and you can't find go-to-market fit, like that repeatable, urgent sales model doesn't show up, that is a problem. I'm not going to lie. Now, is it fatal? No. Because what we've often seen is that, I'll tell you a story. So there's a company in California that sells analytics to marketing people and mostly PR. And they were pursuing go-to-market fit based on sort of what they thought the pattern was. And they were struggling to find sort of the urgency. But then they found out that the demand gen people, in all the deals that they won that went big, the demand gen people were in there like, oh, we need that report. And so what they found was go-to-market fit was possible, but they were just looking in the wrong place. So one of the important things I didn't mention about sort of the search for go-to-market fit is often founders can steer the company the wrong place because you have such a hardwired conception of where you think the product and value proposition can go. That's why hiring sort of an early Davy Crockett sales rep to find the path through the woods is really important, because the real test for sort of repeatability is not whether the founder can sell it over and over again. The real test for repeatability is, can a normal salesperson or normal marketing person that's a mere mortal sell it? And so you will sometimes find that go-to-market fit, if you failed in finding it, doesn't mean it's over. It may just mean you're looking in the wrong place.
the other reason why we really want to highlight the difference between the two is because one common mistake we see is where you feel with just product market fit, you have go-to-market fit, and then you really accelerate your burn rate. That's like, if you do that, then you will most likely die. But if you preserve your cash and keep iterating, then there's probably an adjacency where you can find that urgency or find the right pain point. At which point, then you have the ability to then accelerate.
And actually, that was one of the things that led us to this go-to-market fit concept. Is one of the mistakes that I think the venture capital community, frankly, sort of promulgates into the enterprise startup world is, hey, you have product market fit, great, go hire salespeople, hit the gas, go. And your burn rate goes up, and you went from like 20 customers to 25 customers to 30 customers, and you're like, oh crap, like growth didn't unlock, and it gets scary really fast. So if you look at sort of what that was what sort of led us to this missing link concept of what causes companies to actually go like that, and it's actually finding these three components of go-to-market fit. Yeah, question in the back? Okay, so the question was, sometimes you start with sort of a freemium marketing-led sales model, SaaS company, then all of a sudden you realize, we need to hire salespeople to try and close deals. And changing your go-to-market motion is hard. So I'm going to paraphrase that question a little bit because I think you're hitting on a really important point here, which is if you find go-to-market fit, you sort of win your first, you start to feel that repeatability. If at some point you need to change your go-to-market playbook, it's hard. Because the whole point about this is you found repeatability and it starts to become your muscle memory and the whole company lines up behind it. And if you try and change it, you could sort of get people off it for a little bit and then they sort of go back to like what they were doing before. So for companies that are sort of later stage, you can add more than one go-to-market playbook. Like you can actually have, all right, look, here's our small customer go-to-market playbook. Here's our large customer go-to-market playbook. And you can do that. But you have to be very conscious and very explicit about it. I'll tell you a story at Mobile Iron, how we, fall of 2012, we shifted from selling one product with a go-to-market playbook to selling a platform with 3 products. It was a fundamentally different sort of sales motion for the sales team. And we really nailed Playbook 1.0. And I was like, it was really wired in. So I was like, crap, how are we going to change this? So made the very inefficient and painful decision, but it worked, which was I made every single sales rep, every single SE, and every single marketing person present the new story to me as if I was a customer. 75 individual one-on-one meetings where they presented. You have to kind of snap and jar the organization to shift from Model 1 to Model 2. And it worked. First of all, it like sent the message that I was deadly serious. The second thing is scared the crap out of everybody. Third thing is you got to see people who literally bought in and they got it, and other people who didn't put enough into it, and you're like, all right, you're gone. And it also had a funny little side effect where it exposed me to some of the newer sort of individual contributors in the go-to-market team that I wouldn't have necessarily seen them pitch before. And I got to see them pitch. Some of them were awesome. Like there's this woman, Nikki, who was like a channel manager in Amsterdam, who like was one of the top 5 at adapting to the pitch. I'm like, keep an eye on her. So this changing go-to-market motions is hard. The whole point is you wire the muscle memory. If you need to change it, it's kind of like retraining your muscles. You have to unlearn it. So don't just say, hey, we're going to put together a PowerPoint, a golden pitch, and roll it out on a YouTube video to your sales team and think it's going to change your go-to-market motion. Yeah, question in front.
Is there another company in the works for you?
The question was, another company in the works for me? The answer is, we'll see. How's that for a non-answer? Yeah, question in the back. Davy Crockett, Braveheart. Yes. If you look at sort of whether you're CEO or VP of Finance, CFO, or VP of Sales, it's actually relatively unusual for people to span that whole thing because it's such a, it's 3 totally different jobs and very different behaviors. Some people can. For instance, Mark Smith, who was the VP of Sales at NetScreen Infoblox, Arista, and now he's at Rubrik. He's gone from Davy Crockett to Eisenhower 4 times now. It's relatively unusual, though.
But a big part of why we're writing the book is that I think a big part of why we're writing the book is that by sharing the whole journey, is that people can sort of see how and why they need to change, and by doing that, I think it will really help people go and build their careers if they want to.
Great. One last question. Back by the pillar.
Any interesting commonalities in what people do to create that sense of urgency?
Yes, actually. And it's going to be a little counterintuitive. So the question was, were there any commonalities to how people found sort of that urgency in the wave? Create.
Create and found.
Oh, create and found. I'm going to paraphrase.
Do you mean to say create the urgency or find the urgency?
Create it. So earlier you said, how do you change the dynamics so people don't buy in 6 months? Any commonalities for the people that figured out how to shorten that gap and create that urgency?
Okay, so there's 2 ways to solve that. One is you're barking up the wrong tree and you need to move to a different tree that has more urgency. The other one is you're barking up the right tree, but you just need to figure out how to light some fires. I'm totally mixing metaphors here. So there's 2 parts to this. So let me do the find urgency part first, and then we'll do the create urgency. So the find urgency part, one of the mistakes sometimes startups make is to say, we are going to be ruthlessly focused on this one very narrow bullseye, and we are going to focus everything we have on that one thing. We're going to nail it. That's awesome if you pick the right bullseye. If you didn't pick the right bullseye, you're dead. So, one of the things that I recommend, and one of the commonalities we saw, was that don't presume you know all the answers. And it's a little bit inefficient, and it feels a little heretical. But in the early days, you need to sort of cast a slightly wider net around what you think your bullseye is. And you may find some hot spots sort of outside that original bullseye, which may be warmer than the bullseye. And guess what? You sort of go, whoop, that's the new bullseye. That happened to us at Mobile Iron. What we thought was the bullseye, the urgent bullseye actually ended up being a little bit to the left. And so we pivoted the company to say, okay, that's the bullseye. It wasn't really a pivot, it was more of a shift. So answer number 1 is don't be dogmatic about what you think your bullseye is, where the urgency is. Because if you're saying I'm trying to create urgency in a bullseye that may not have it, ask yourself, is there an adjacency that may have more urgency? And be willing to go after that. The second one is, if you think you're on the right spot, but customers don't have the right level of urgency, that's really where you need to find the wows. And I realize that's sort of a cheeky term, but understand what's something that could make your customer a hero. What's something that when you're talking to them, you sort of see their body language change. Sometimes it can be a relatively small thing in your product. One of the mistakes that a lot of startups make, and actually we had this at Mobile Iron, I'll tell you the story. So we first built Mobile Iron, we built a multi-operating system, mobile security and policy engine that allowed enterprises to adopt mobile as a mobile-first solution. In 2008, people were like, that's really cool, but not now. They're like, dude, can you help me with iPhones? So sometimes you may be thinking too broadly, and as you get more broad, sometimes the urgency diffuses. And if you could find something like a real pain in the butt down here, something that's driving them crazy, ask questions. That's one of the things Davy Crockett's sales reps do a really good job of, is they ask questions. Hey, Mr. Customer, what are the other things around this that are kind of bothering you that we might be able to help you with? So ask those kinds of questions. All right, that's it.